Hello everyone, I'm Pawan from Dubai World Trade Center and a very warm welcome to the second of our series of webinars at marketingmania.virtual. These digital trailblazing sessions, including webinars, interviews, virtual hangouts, and podcasts, are all part of the Marketing Mania show taking place later this year at Dubai World Trade Center. The show will see visitors from the marketing, advertising, digital, creative communities from across the world discover, learn, celebrate, and shape the future of marketing together. I would now like to draw your attention to a few housekeeping rules which will be mentioned in the chat room throughout the webinar. The topic for today is brand value in the MENA region, impact of the global crisis and levers to overcome it. What we saw in our launch webinar in May were some of the most inspirational stories of brands and startups trying to fight back and survive this crisis. Well, do we really know how long brands need to continue fighting to survive? Do they know how deep they are in water, or how early can they reach the shores of securing and growing revenues? Can they move from a survival mindset to thrive post-COVID? Well, today's webinar will be a guide for organizations to brand evaluate themselves in these unprecedented times. Without any further delay, let me welcome today's moderator, Richie Mehta, founder and CEO of School of Marketing. He launched a special e-learning program for digital marketers impacting 100,000 learners globally, which is aimed to create future chief marketing officers. He's now sought after by major Fortune 500 companies. Over to you, Richie.
Pawan, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to welcome everybody to another webinar as part of the Marketing Mania series. Now, we've been living in this global pandemic now, in some cases, for around 6 months. And many economies, including the UAE, are starting to, say, lift restrictions. And it feels like we're getting back to some sense of normality, albeit from a social distance. And despite this, we have seen a new wave of unrest with protests all around the world due to Black Lives Matter movement. And it's clearly still a very fragile and volatile environment that we currently find ourselves in. So for companies and brands, it's been a time when actions certainly speak louder than words. And in fact, the latest Edelman Trust Barometer showed that consumers expect brands to really step up, be part of the solution, and put the public good over profit. There are certainly winners and losers, and today we're going to find out which brands have really stepped up to the mark and those that just have not. Now, before diving in, I wanted to say a little bit about brand finance. Now, Brand Finance is the world's leading independent brand valuation consultancy that specializes in brand valuation. They launched their Global 500 report at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. And in the current climate, they've reported that global brands stand to lose up to £706 billion GBP compared to the valuation before the coronavirus pandemic. Now, we're very lucky here today to be joined by David Haig, their CEO, to talk us through some of the movers and shakers in the MENA region. Now, David has worked with a range of blue chip brands such as Shell, Vodafone, BT, and Barclays. And he also lectured at Harvard and the London Business School. So hi there, David. How's it going?
Hi, great to see you. A great pleasure to be with you.
You too as well, David. Thanks for being with us. Now, David, before we get into the main thrust of your presentation and your findings, I just wanted to kick off with something that's really been on my mind at the moment. So what would you say, has across this last couple of months been the number one learning that people on this webinar could take away at this moment in time?
I think the number one learning is that things are moving very, very fast indeed. You have to keep very close to how your stakeholders are feeling, particularly your customers, and therefore diagnosis, as with any kind of sickness, diagnosis is the key. And so brands and brand managers should be conducting research and market research and staying close to their customers to understand how to respond in order to make their brands healthy going forward.
I love that. And I suspect there needs to be a bit of pace that comes along with that at this.
A little bit of pace, did you say?
A little bit of pace, yes?
Yes, they have to do it fast. Basically, things are changing very fast indeed. And if you don't stay up with the way things are moving, you will fall behind and your competitors will get one ahead of you.
That sounds great. Well, David, look, before we get into your presentation, we want to make this webinar extremely interactive as possible. And we're gonna have a few polls throughout the webinar. So without further ado, let's launch the first poll. Participants and everyone, please let us know your thoughts. Can we have the first poll, please? Brilliant. So how early can you recover lost revenue due to the crisis? Fastest finger first. And we'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll see the results. So this is specifically how long you think you will need to recover revenue due to the crisis. And the results show, wow, a significant number of people still feel that they're more than 6 months away from actually recovering any sort of lost revenue from the crisis. Perhaps unsurprising when you look at a range of fallout that's taken place. I mean, the UK recently published figures that the GDP had fallen by up to 20% in the last quarter, which said another way, actually means that we've gone back or we've wiped out up to 18 years worth of growth in what has been 2 months. Pretty astonishing. David, let's start your presentation now. So over to you to talk about some of the latest figures of brand valuation in the MENA region.
Certainly. Well, first of all, let me say I'm pleased to see that things are beginning to get back to normal. I've been locked down here in Cornwall in west of England for 4 months, and it begins to indicate that things are getting back to normal when it's raining every day in the middle of summer, which it is now, but the pub is opening on Monday and the football started yesterday. So Man City is chasing Liverpool, having beaten Arsenal 3-0 yesterday, so it's getting back to normal. So what we're here to talk about is Middle Eastern brands. I must say, weather-wise, I'd far rather be there. But let me start by saying something about brand finance. Brand finance has been around for 25 years. I set it up with the view to bridge the gap between marketing and finance, so to bring technical knowledge of finance to marketing decisions. And we now are based in London, but we have a spread globally. So we have a particularly good perspective on world trends. We have a unique combination of staff. And as Richie said, we value a lot of brands speculatively, in fact, 5,000 annually, which gives us a very good comparative understanding of how brands are performing. Now, when we do our work, we principally lead with valuation of businesses, but then within that, we value specific intangible assets. And the key one that we are valuing is brands. And we help to develop the international standard on brand valuation, which is ISO 10668. It has a number of different techniques for different uses, but the technique that we've used for our global tables is one called royalty relief, which is the one that is adopted by all finance directors, auditors, accountants, lawyers, and tax people as a way of actually putting a reliable value on the tangible asset, the intangible asset of brand, which can be transferred. And the way that it's done is you analyze the strength of the brand, you determine what you believe the brand owner would pay if they did not own the brand, but they were licensing it from a third-party owner. That's the royalty. And then you determine what the revenues are that are being traded under that brand. You apply the royalty rate to those turnovers, and that gets you a stream of income that's attributable to the brand each year. And we then put a capital value on it using discounted cash flow techniques. And that is exactly the technique that finance directors use. So in the Middle East, we've been conducting these valuations for just over 15 years. And it's interesting how they've developed. You'll see here that the top 10 most valuable brands are dominated by oil and gas, banking, telcos, and airlines. It's a function of developing countries that the pillars of the economy, the infrastructure of the economy, generates the most significant brands for some time, but it creates an umbrella under which consumer brands and smaller brands grow. And the biggest brands here, you can see this year, the shock is that Aramco leapt into the table from nowhere because it published its financial details, closely followed by ADNOC, which is obviously the strong oil player in the UAE. And you'll see here that the third player is Etisalat, which has been taking advantage of 5G technology and is storming ahead in terms of the services it provides. So you can see here it's banking, oil, telecoms, and so on. That's by value. If we now look, though, at strength, strength is a different concept completely. So if you look at the car industry globally, Toyota is by far the most valuable brand because it's so huge and has such coverage. But it's a fairly mid to low end brand. The strongest brand in the world, in the car market, is a Ferrari. And Ferrari is very resilient as a result. So here we see the Middle Eastern brands. You can see here that Emirates, while not necessarily being the most valuable brand, is the strongest brand in the Middle East, strongly followed by Etisalat. Slide. So just in summary, if I were to break down the numbers, you can see that there are only 4 oil and gas brands, but they represent 40% of the total value. Banks, there are over 20 of them, and they represent 25% of the value. And then all the others come below. The other category, which includes things like retailers and commercial services brands, logistics and so on, is a relatively small proportion, but is growing. And you see here that it's 150 billion of value in the brands in the top 50 in the UAE. And as we said, quite a bit of that, 23 billion of it, potentially is under threat from the COVID crisis. So let's just talk about the COVID crisis a moment. What we did is that our valuations are determined on the 1st of January every year, which is just before the COVID crisis hit. So in the last quarter of last year, we put everything together and we look at the forecasts, we assess the strength of the brands, and we put the values together. So the values we just published are those values from January 1. But what we then looked at was by sector, which are the sectors that are most at risk as a result of the crisis that developed in Q1. Some areas we said, well, there would be limited impact. So cosmetics, pharma, food. Then some we said would have a moderate impact, car rental, logistics, mining, etc. And some would have a very high impact and be adversely affected by the crisis. So inevitably, airlines, restaurants, consumption goods like beer, to some extent banking, leisure and tourism, and so on. And that's where we got our $23 billion of potential hit. Now, interestingly, over the last 3 or 4 months, what has become clear is that some are not just having no impact, but are actually taking advantage of the changes and are growing their brand share. We'll come back to that later. If we look at some of the brands that have responded well to the crisis, let's look at the telecom sector. Etisalat, for example, changed its network name to Stay Home Etisalat. It's given free mobile coverage to certain households, and it's given 3-month free trials to businesses to help during the crisis. STC has launched its Far Yet Close campaign, and it's also offered free internet services and free awareness messages, getting close to its customers and looking after them. If we look at DP World is a B2B company, and it's right at the heart of the logistics chain worldwide and has ground to a bit of a halt, but is now coming back into its own and getting started again. You'll see here that it's set the highest standards for its staff. It is looking after its staff to make sure that they are safe, and it's providing accommodation for key workers so that they don't necessarily have to use public transport. Whereas with its clients, it's protecting essential services and supply chains, and therefore is highly respected and regarded by both its staff and its customers. Next slide. Emirates and the airline sector is one of the most heavily affected by the COVID crisis. It's a real catastrophe for some airlines, but in the case of Emirates, it's very swiftly pivoted and it's moved to shifting cargo and medical supplies on its planes. It's cut services, but not cut them completely. And then it's launched on the other end, the Do You Remember advertising and communication campaign. And to show that it cares about its customers, it's developed as the first airline to have on-site rapid COVID-19 tests for passengers. So it's preparing itself for when things get back to normal. And finally, if I look at the banking sector worldwide has long been struggling with its reputation, particularly during the financial crisis. But nowadays, banks are very well capitalized. They've learned the lessons of the past. And the current economic downturn is really caused by a health pandemic. It's not caused by bad investment or bad structuring of bank debts and so on. So hopefully there'll be a rebound. And what certain banks have done, Dubai Islamic Bank, for example, has bent over backwards to provide short-term cash flow support, waivers and benefits on credit cards. And we see across the banking sector, the good players are actually responding well to their customers to help out of the short-term problem. Now, I just want to turn briefly to soft power. Brand finance measures brand valuation for nations as well as for companies. And the reason we do that is because there's a clear overlap. You know, German nation branding impacts on the demand for German cars. British values impact on things like clothing and certain luxury goods. And so it's very important that companies cultivate their soft power. And last year, we actually did our first global survey of 55,000 people. What is soft power? It's a nation's ability to influence the preferences and behaviors of various actors in the international arena, which includes states, corporations, communities, and publics, through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion. And that sweet talking gets countries to increase their familiarity, their influence, and their reputation. And there are a number of different pillars that countries can improve: their business and trade, their governance, their international relations, culture, media, education, and then people and values. And why is it important? Because corporate brands will definitely be impacted by how their governments handle the crisis and generally by how they handle themselves. So let's briefly turn to how countries globally score. I mean, inevitably large countries like United States, Germany and UK do extremely well, but certainly in the Middle East, the major strong players have scored very well in our table last year, and we're anticipating they'll do well again. The UAE, Saudi and Qatar have all done well. Let's look at Saudi, for example. They're in the top 10 for influence, and where it comes to governance, they acted very swiftly to shut places of worship to protect health. Where it comes to science, ISDB is providing financial support for technologies that will help reduce COVID-19. And meanwhile, they are continuing to pursue the diversification of the economy by investment in digital tech. The UAE is 10th in terms of international relations and is also taking many initiatives. Here are just two of the examples. Expo 2020, which sadly has been postponed for a year, will be a contribution to post-pandemic economies. And you can see on the right here that the UAE already scores high on easy to do business with and a strong and stable economy. An initiative like Expo 20, which now becomes 2021, will further enhance that. And one very interesting initiative is the Mission to Mars, which is intended to demonstrate that the UAE is capable of a lot and has all sorts of cultural and technological opportunities, including demonstrating that STEM is key to the development of the future of the UAE economy. So you see over there on the right, under the education and science pillar, that it already scores reasonably well as a leader in science, as a leader in technology, with a strong educational system. And the intention is that this initiative will further grow the perception of UAE as a place for those things. And that will all help companies operating from the UAE. Next slide. So the last section here is just talking about lessons from the past and from past crises. I am quite old and long in the tooth. I've seen quite a lot of crises. I saw the dot-com bubble burst. I saw the financial crisis. There have been several others. And now we're here with probably the biggest of the lot. This data shows what happened to share prices in different sectors after the financial crisis. And it's quite clear to see that some sectors do much worse than others. So some in the last crisis did badly, like pharma and cosmetics. This time they'll probably fare better because it's a different kind of crisis. but there will be a shock to values. Next slide. But the thing that we found across the board is that those brands which have strong brand scores, because their brand equity with their stakeholders and the investment they're making in their brands is strong, inevitably outperform the weaker brands. And when you come after the crisis, you find that the ones with strong brands that have invested in the past perform well and come through the crisis. Next slide. And so, three simple messages. There is a tendency for finance directors to hold back on marketing budgets during crises for natural conservative reasons. They're being prudent. But one of the things that's come through loud and clear from many previous crises is that one should actually spend through and continue spending during these crises to come out well on the other end. And talking about media budgets, for example, the cost of media generally decreases during recessions and crises because people back away from it. But meanwhile, consumers are more receptive and have more time to absorb the brand messages. So it's a receptive audience with a lower media cost. And if the messaging is appropriate and backed by actual actions, it can have a much more powerful emotional effect, which creates brand loyalty. And here is P&G. According to A.G. Lafley, the inspirational ex-CEO of P&G, who pushed forward the boundaries of Procter & Gamble, he said, P&G has a philosophy and a strategy. When times are tough, we build market share. And you can actually see right now in this crisis that P&G has ramped up its marketing spend, not curtailed it. And I would say to most brands, particularly in the Middle East, that they should be thinking in the same terms. Now is the time to invest, not back away. So let me just summarize before our Q&A. First of all, you have to make sure that your messaging and tone is right. Some brands have been mouthing platitudes and not really doing anything. They've just been putting ads out expressing sympathy for the COVID crisis without actually doing anything. But as we've seen, Etisalat and STC have actually done something. You've got to get out there and communicate with your stakeholders and demonstrate support. Being close to your stakeholders and understanding what they're looking for is key, which is why I mentioned that point about diagnostics. You need to ramp up your promotion, not decrease it. And finally, you need to remain in your customers' minds. So don't stop advertising, don't stop communicating, just make it genuine. And finally, nurture your digital presence. Now is a time to take advantage of the online revolution, particularly because most people are at home with not much to do, and they are looking at their screens day in, day out to get news, to feel part of a community, to try and understand what the new normal is going to be like. And you as a brand need to be part of that. So with that, I think we're going to move to a Q&A session where we can answer specific questions that you may have. I'll pass back to Richie.
That was fantastic. What a great run through of so many different insights. So thank you for that. David, one of the things that came through front of my mind during that session was you talked a lot about the specific acts that brands are doing at this moment in time. And clearly the mantra has been actions speak louder than words. But what is the evidence that over the long term, those brands that actually invest, not just in their comms, but in their actions, will actually see their brand valuations thriving in 1 to 2 years' time?
Well, I think that there are a lot of academic studies that have been done in previous crises, and I'm aware of some that have been done by the London Business School, for example, during the 1997 crisis, and then they did some in further subsequent crises, where brands take real action to do things that are helpful to their customers during difficult times. It has a very marked effect on their attitude towards the brand following the crisis. So dropping prices, providing better services, going out of their way, doing advertising, leading with the front foot, like cricket analogy, step forward with the front foot, don't step back, because customers will remember afterwards, but it needs to be genuine and you need to do something real. And I and my colleagues have looked at a number of campaigns that have happened over the last 3 or 4 months. Some are cringe-making in that they mouth platitude but don't really do anything. And some good ones, Ford, and some of the ones we've seen in the Middle East, are actually doing very positive things for their customers.
Yes, David, that sounds, that sounds right to me. I would want to go to the audience as well now. And so please, anyone who's got any questions, do share them at this point in time. We're going to run into another poll just to get some thoughts and views from the audience at this point, and then we'll take some questions. So can we have the next poll, please? So which sector do you think will see the best brand value recovery in the MENA region? Let's see if some of these sectors line up to the brand study that you presented there, David. And the answer is, should I say answers? Great. So what people are suggesting is the telco sector is probably going to have the swiftest bounce back of all. What's particularly interesting, third on the list, was airlines, funny enough. David, any sort of thoughts, initial thoughts on those particular sectors as they come through?
Well, interesting enough, I suspect that the telecom sector probably hasn't actually declined as much as people might think, because they are crucial to the delivery of the infrastructure that's keeping people going. You know, internet shopping, media, and so on is all relying on telecom. So I don't actually think that they will have declined quite so much, but I do think that they will grow rapidly following it. In the case of something like airlines, airlines are in a real crisis worldwide. I think that's well covered. Quite a lot are actually going to go bust permanently. But the ones that will rebound in their value most are great brands like Emirates that are doing the right thing. They're well capitalized, and they will come out of this crisis better than they were before.
Great. And David, I want to ask specifically, and the banking sector was on the list there, but we've got a question from Ahmed in Bahrain. And he asked specifically about why is the banking sector having such a huge impact? I mean, has there been a drop in loans? I mean, it seems like in many ways, they're going to be part of that recovery and helping people get back on their feet. Surely they should have a positive outcome.
Yes, I think that the real question with banks is that they borrow money from people and then they lend it to people. And the real problem is that all those people that they're lending it to, quite a lot of them might well go bust or not be able to repay. So when we actually look at the financial performance of banks, there is an indication that they may go down. And the real question really is, are banks being responsive and helping their customers so that they survive? Those banks that help their customers and help them to survive will find that the loans stay solvent, that they won't have so much of a hit. And here in the UK, for example, there has been a big argument between the banks and the government. And the banks have basically pushed it back onto the government to subsidize all the loans, which is a bit unfair. And they are just a mechanism for delivering results. But those banks that look after their customers will do well post-crisis.
David, you referred to in your analysis, your 5 points, 2 key major things. The first one was around continuing to invest in your brand is a good thing during a crisis. And second of all, the digital revolution is very much here, and focusing on digitization at this point is too going to be a good thing. So the question for me, and this comes from Karan from India. So companies that offer digital marketing specific to the SME sectors, do you think they will have a faster, more rapid recovery rate than, say, others, perhaps who are on non or less digital play?
Well, I think that's inevitable. Things that are online have actually boomed during this downturn. If you look at Amazon, which we already said was the most valuable brand in the world, they apparently have taken on 250,000 extra staff worldwide to meet the demand. The incidence of people using Amazon has absolutely skyrocketed. Every single one of their businesses has grown. And everything they do is promoted via digital. Their business is digital. The digital economy is definitely going to do a lot better post this crisis than the more traditional industry.
David, what's interesting about that thought, and I'm a big proponent of D2C. I think it's certainly going to be on the rise, and we've seen major FMCG companies like PepsiCo, for example, go into D2C or direct to consumer in a big way. Do you see that as a trend that's going to hold big companies in better stead as they go into the future, or working still with retailers, or kind of going through the Amazons of the world? How do you see that playing out in the
Well, I think it's actually going to take people quite a long time to get used to the idea of going physically into shops and mixing with people, because they're frightened about being reinfected. So, and also a lot of people have discovered how convenient, online shopping is for everything. And so I think there has been a seismic shift towards the convenience of online shopping. And I think the online shopping entities are ramping up their capability of delivering. So it's easy. You order a thing one day, it's there the next day. Why would you go to the shops?
Brilliant. And yeah, so I think there's a tectonic shift from a consumer behavioral perspective for sure. But I think also the one thing that's coming to the forefront is the company's bid to maintain customer experience and control, which is potentially another big route into this sort of space to own the entire end-to-end journey. I must move on and get more specific into the MENA region. And there's a specific question coming in from Niraj from Singapore. He says that he's an investor from outside of MENA, but potentially what companies do you think are potential winners post-COVID, potentially looking at it from his point of view as an investor?
Well, I suppose if you adopt the Warren Buffett school of thinking, it's always safest to invest in brands you think are excellent for the long term and not disinvest. So if you were looking at the MENA region, there are some amazing companies here across all the different sectors. GEMS in commercial services, DP World in logistics, Emirates is a great company, Al Marai is a brilliant company, Panda, which is part of Savola, is a brilliant company. There are a lot of very, very good companies with very strong brands. If you want a safe investment, invest in those great brands which will power through the recession. But it's also possible that there are a lot of much smaller brands that will leapfrog ahead. And if you're a slightly riskier kind of investor, then there are probably going to be some interesting opportunities in all sorts of different new areas. Our tables tend to focus on publicly quoted larger brands because that's where the information is available. So I hesitate to recommend any smaller brands, but I certainly know that the brands in the Middle East that are doing well are world class, and I suspect they will do well going forward.
Now you talk about world class brands. I want to hone in on this a little bit more. And there's a question coming in from Abdullah from Saudi Arabia. And he actually asks how companies can maintain confidence in their brands at this time, potentially maybe reflecting on some of what the best brands that you mentioned have already done. How can others follow suit?
I think the great thing is to be authentic and to be agile and close to your customers. I mean, brands rely not just on customers, but on all stakeholders. You need to understand how all your stakeholders are feeling, what they want and how it's changing, and respond quickly to it. That is how you get an advantage going forward. So do you really understand what your customers are feeling about your brand compared with other brands? This is why I said at the beginning, diagnosis, market research, and close understanding of how you're doing against your competitors has never been more important. So you can make swift decisions to capture market share and the minds of your stakeholders.
Now, at the same time, though, there needs to be some ruthless prioritization that goes on here, right? I mean, it's not all about that sort of investment. There has to be defensive strategies that take shape too. And I mean, you talk, there's a great comment by Shweta in the chat, which talks specifically about Emirates. Now, Emirates, as you clearly laid out, a great world-class brands, but have had to take very hard decisions, and that has meant, reducing their workforce and staff. How do you equate those two between investment and potentially, making tough decisions?
Yeah, it's very difficult. In downturns, no one really wants to lay people off or cut things. But it's sort of like in the garden, you have to cut the roses back if you want them to grow again. And so basically you're protecting the people that are still there and the services that are still there by actually making these cuts. When you do them, you have to behave in a way, a responsible way, a kind way to the people that you are letting go. And when things recover, you leave it open for them to come back to you. It's all about the way you behave. if you behave in
Now,
a decent way, you will come back.
I agree with that, David. But look, the UK has announced, there's a study that I read recently that said up to 42% of people who have been furloughed will not necessarily go back to the jobs that they left. Do you think there's going to be a fundamental shift in the way organizations are then structured in a post-COVID world?
Yes, I do. I think one of the things we've learned as brand finance is that our office in central London, which is amazing, right in the middle of the city, is not really necessary for operating our business. Everyone was given a state-of-the-art laptop, sent home, connected up. Our IT guys have connected everyone. We're all talking on Zoom and Teams. And frankly, we seem to work almost as well, if not better than we did before. So I think the chances of decreasing the size of our very expensive central office has got to be high. And I think an awful lot of other companies are going to go to do the same thing. So I think fundamental working patterns will definitely change and cost structures will change. But one of the issues is 42% may not be taken back into their old jobs. One question is, well, how many of them were unnecessary but were hiding in the undergrowth prior to this crisis? I once years ago worked on a thing where a hurricane hit a building. They had to rebuild it. They sent everyone home to work. Within 3 months, they realized about 15% of the staff weren't actually doing anything. They just used to go into the office and go to meetings. And I think this has shaken out some people who are probably not that efficient, and it has changed working patterns, and that is definitely going to happen going forward. In a way, that's a very healthy process.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And in fact, if you talked about the last crisis or the financial services crisis, and that actually spurred on the gig economy, which then of course is now absolutely normalized in society. And I suspect that this one too will have a potentially similar effect on people.
Yeah, well, I mean, here in the UK, I've seen a lot of commentary about what they call the zombie economy, which is companies that are only just about surviving. They've got lots of debt, they don't make much profit, they tie up resources. And I've seen some hard-nosed right-wing economists say, well, just let them all go bust, because there'll be a reallocation of resources to growth companies. And, to some extent, that's fair, as long as it's done in a managed way. Economies grow when they are dynamic and change.
And will MENA be a plus beneficiary, a positive beneficiary of that?
Well, I think it's quite clear that the MENA region is already a very dynamic, fast-changing place. It's not like the UK is a very old, sclerotic kind of economy, whereas the Middle East is a very dynamic economy already. But I'm sure it will continue to be so.
One of the biggest hit sectors within the UAE currently is the entertainment and tourism sector. Now, specifically in Dubai, of course, that accounts for a large proportion of its productivity and growth. So this is a question from Christine. She talks about what do you see is is going to be the state of those two sectors specifically in Dubai?
Well, here in the UK, they reckon that, 25% of pubs and 25% of hotels are small, cramped, difficult, and will make it extremely difficult to trade post-Brexit in a safe distancing kind of way. But then there are others that are the other end of the spectrum, where they actually have large premises, they're arranged in such a way that it is possible to reconfigure, and they will probably do well and get back sooner. The question really is, in the estate of properties that are out there in the MENA region, are they configured in such a way that they will be able to adapt to the new environment? From my experience is that hotels are big, well laid out with plenty of space. There's an opportunity to distance. You could even find, given that it's a safe and a very nice environment in the Middle East, that it might actually increase its share of global leisure and tourism, because people would rather go to somewhere like the Middle East, where they know that the weather's going to be good, where they know the security is good, and the buildings are well laid out. You might find you actually increase market share.
I'll tell you what, it's a great observation. And in fact, one of the big proponents or that could spur this on is very much technology. Even AI solutions could be a great way to overcome this. So Christine actually kind of follows on from her question and talks specifically and asks about the role of AI within the future sort of post-COVID world in relation to these sectors. Do you have a viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I think I'm probably a bit too old to know much about AI, but my understanding is that you're using high-powered technology to infer what customers are going to do. And that really just comes back to my point. can you diagnose what customers are thinking, how they are thinking, and what they're going to do? Can you move swiftly to deliver something they really want? So AI is a tool and a technique for doing what I was describing slightly in more conventional terms. The better you understand your customers, the more you are going to profit from it.
Yes. I mean, I also, just to add to that, I suspect a lot of it has got to do with automation and potentially sort of, the removal or distancing of human interactions, even within the sort of the entertainment space and tourism space. And I think we've seen a lot of it even in the last couple of months. I saw a great example just a few days ago where, because live entertainment has taken a hit, actually live entertainers have gone to Zoom to create virtual sort of entertainment hubs and things like that. And even on the last webinar we had, Sudhir from Book My Show, and he was talking a lot about how they've gone virtual with their own sort of platforms. And I think that's going to, really going to help kind of move things along. Now,
yes, I think that's definitely true.
And we talk a lot about perhaps some of the positive aspects about what may happen with these various brands. Rachel from Portugal has a question perhaps on the other side of the fence, and they asked what sectors are the worst performers.
The worst performers in terms of the effect that it's had on them, or the worst performers in terms of their response?
Let's go for both.
Well, to be honest, the ones that have been hit worst are the ones that obviously require very close personal interaction. And that is definitely restaurants, public houses and bars and cafes, hotels, airlines, and entertainment venues like theatres and art galleries and so on. All of those have been absolutely demolished by this crisis. Here in the UK, they reckon this is the worst crisis that has ever hit our museums and theatres and so on. And the question is, will they rebound? I suspect that it will be very tough to rebound unless there is a vaccine. Because if people have to be socially distanced in a lot of these things, so it's less about the performance of the individual companies, it's more about the actual fundamentals. If you can't distance people and you can't enjoy a play, they were saying, well, you can't even put on a play because there's no such thing as social distancing in a play, and if you're in the audience you can't be socially distanced, so you can't do a play. So unless they get a cure, some of those sectors are never really going to recover.
No, I can see that. I mean, so you talked about quite a few examples there of brands that are perhaps in trouble or sectors that are in trouble. What about examples of organizations that perhaps have got it wrong?
Got it wrong? Got it right?
Yeah, got it wrong.
Got it wrong. Well, certainly I've noticed that there are certain retailers that have been extremely slow to get their online ordering systems, and they have been really badly hit. So there are a lot of retailers in the UK that had no investment in online ordering and delivery, and they have just been sitting there on their hands, while those that made big investments have acted like, there's one called Ocado in the UK, which is actually exporting its technology all around the world now. That one has done extremely well. So yes. To some extent, this has really accelerated trends that were there before. And those who have done badly are the ones who are probably doing the wrong thing beforehand.
Well, David, we could probably spar this out all day long, and I think it's been a stimulating conversation. I know we're running out of time here, so do you have any specific closing remarks that you would like to make before we close out?
Well, I suppose my closing remark would be that I think it's potentially the Middle East is in a better position than most economies. It might seem terrible out there at the moment, but I think a lot of money has been invested in the Middle East in all sorts of infrastructure, which puts it in a position to actually adapt to this whole thing. It's a very dynamic economy, and generally it's well funded. Although there's an oil crisis going on, there is ample capital to invest in the Middle East. And I suspect that it will continue to power ahead if you look at what Saudi and UAE are doing and other countries in the area, it is a growth economy, and I think it will come through this well.
Thank you, David. That sounds great. And like I said, just want to thank you for being on, taking the time today. It's been brilliant to talk to you. I guess we probably could do this all day.
Great.
Now, everybody, as part of our last poll, I would like to launch the last one as to get your views on a key question that's top of our minds. So can we launch the last poll, please? So what level of severity do you think your company's brand is currently at? And the answer is great. So it feels like certainly a mixed bag where a lot of people are in the midst of a significant transition within their brands. And I think it comes back to David's initial point at the outset around diagnosis, all around being able to establish what the new realities are and then being able to pivot and move in that direction. So thank you for that final poll there. Now, I really think that we've covered so much ground in this short space of time, and we've certainly seen that some sectors are performing much better than others, and historically as they do. But brand finance has certainly revealed that the oil and gas, banking, telco, and even airline sectors are ones that are sort of robust and stand the test of time. It shows a real resilience when you see brands like Emirates, for example, coming to the forefront at this time, really pivoting their businesses to take advantage of what could be a critical situation for them. Now, we love the company responses as well. So David talked a bit from different sectors as well, the telco sector, the banking sector, with Etisalat as well changing their name and their brand entirely in order to cope with this. So that's been a great sort of learning around how people can evolve and do things. And finally, David did talk about the role of the soft power and the role of the country and brands coming together at this time to really kind of leverage off each other and be more intertwined in order to take advantage of what's currently happening. So that's all from me. I just want to as my last comment, to say that remember, this is part of the Marketing Mania series. And we're doing this relatively often now. And also there's the mega show coming up towards the end of the year where I'm going to be hosting a range of sessions as well. So with that, thanks for tuning in. And I'm going to pass back to Pawan for his closing remarks.
Wow, what a session. On behalf of Dubai World Trade Center, a big thank you to Richie and David for the highly educational session. I hope all of you guys have found today's session as engaging, informative, and thought-provoking as I have. And guess what? Chief Marketing Officers last for only 2 years globally. That's the churn-out rate, which companies think will be even lower, especially post-COVID. And you know what's keeping CEOs and marketers awake? Not knowing where they stand in terms of measuring the costs of lost opportunities. Hopefully, today's session must have educated you on, and I'm confident that marketers and companies will come out of the situation stronger, more efficient, and resilient. Stay in touch, stay connected, and look forward to seeing you again in a few weeks' time for the next in our series of webinars. Stay safe. Goodbye.